Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you joining us for this press conference ahead of the vote on the Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology Act, or POST Act. This is essential legislation that has been pending the City Council for more than 3 years, and it's going to be quite crucial in ensuring that this bill is going to be a crucial check on NYPD surveillance of communities of color, of the Muslim American community, a way to finally know what tools the NYPD is deploying to track each and every one of us. For far too long, the NYPD has used federal and private grants to circumvent civilian oversight, to buy these tools in the shadows, to spy on us without any accountability or safeguards. But this is the beginning of the end for that history of abusive and discriminatory policing. I'm thrilled to be joined today by several of our partners from the long-standing campaign to bring forward this legislation. We'll be going through one by one. I posted the order into the chat window, and this will be a really important opportunity to hear from the array of organizations that have put so much time and energy to getting to this moment where the City Council will be voting on this bill. Of course, nothing is guaranteed, and so we are continuing to call on every single council member, including those who have not yet co-sponsored the legislation, to join us in supporting the POST Act, and of course, calling on Mayor de Blasio to sign the legislation into law once it is passed. So with that, I will be turning to Ángel Díaz, who is counsel with the Brennan Center for Justice. Ángel, if you could unmute yourself.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for joining. I wanted to thank Councilmember Gibson and Councilmember Bradlander for their leadership on this issue, as well as the Speaker for bringing up this overdue bill for a vote. I think it's important to acknowledge that this vote comes in the wake of weeks of protests, where New Yorkers across the city are coming together and demanding more. They're demanding more accountability and meaningful accountability. They want oversight into how our city spends money on policing and whether police are the solution to every social problem. The POST Act is an important part of that conversation. It's unacceptable for the nation's largest police department to have zero accountability over how it uses its surveillance tools. Unchecked, the NYPD uses facial recognition technology that can't reliably identify non-white faces. It has gang databases that are swollen in tens of thousands and are 95% or more are non-white faces. And it uses predictive policing systems that take yesterday's biased policing practices and runs them through a seemingly neutral computer system. The POST Act will require basic steps to change that. It'll ask very simple questions like, what tools do you have? What data does it collect? How long do you keep that data? Who do you share that information with? It'll also ask that police sit down and explain how they're protecting the privacy of New Yorkers and how they've thought through the discriminatory impacts that these tools might have. These simple disclosures can have meaningful impacts on our justice system. It'll allow defense counsel to better understand how their clients are surveilled and advocate when their constitutional rights are being violated. And instead of having us respond to the latest police scandal, it'll allow the public and the council to respond before a tool is deployed. As we look to end today's biased policing practices, it's important that we don't simply replicate it through a digital system with risk. That new system will be harder to detect if it's increasingly visible to see. We're looking forward to the passage of the POST Act and moving towards a world where we serve communities with social services and not surveillance. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for that, Ángel. And I do think it is really crucial to connect what we are seeing with the POST Act with the unprecedented protests and uprisings taking place across this country. We know all too well that police surveillance leads to unnecessary police encounters, false arrests, and violence. As George Floyd's death shows us all too painfully, every unnecessary police encounter can be a matter of life and death. So I see that we are joined by the council member Um, it appears that, oh, yep, she's there. So Councilmember Vanessa Gibson, would love to turn this over to you as the lead sponsor of this legislation. Councilmember Gibson has played an incredible role over multiple years fighting to get this vital piece of legislation through, and truly we would not be here today without her incredible leadership on the council in fighting for surveillance reform.
Good morning, Albert. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. Ángel, it's good to see you again. And to all of my colleagues, my allies in the struggle for equality, blessed Wednesday to each and every one of you. Assalamu alaikum to my Muslim brothers and sisters. This is really an important opportunity for all of us, and I am so grateful to be in this moment in history with each and every one of you. This has been a long journey, and many of you have been on this journey for quite some time, and I am so grateful that we are finally seeing the City Council vote on the POST Act, the Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology Bill that was introduced years ago in the New York City Council. I do want to take this opportunity to really acknowledge all of the advocates and activists out there across the city of New York, across the country, who have mobilized, because many of us are just tired. We are tired of seeing our Black brothers and sisters who have been injured and or killed by police violence. We lift up so many names of individuals who have been taken from us senselessly and whose families will never be the same again. And I think what we are seeing across this country is a city and a nation that has been unrest for a very long time. We have been dealing with two pandemics in our city, the pandemic of COVID-19, as well as the pandemic of 401 years of systemic racism in our society, where Black and brown New Yorkers continue to be judged by the color of their skin and not the content of their character and who they are. And what we are seeing in the name and the recognition of our brother George Floyd is a sleeping nation that's finally waking up. A nation that has been sleeping for far too long. Our public advocate always says, stay woke, because we have to stay awake and realize the magnitude of what is happening right before our eyes, whether we see it on video, whether we see it on social media, or any other mechanism of social media. And it's been a long journey. I'm emotional because there's a lot going on, and I know that a lot of the police reform, police accountability efforts that you're seeing across New York, but really across all of the country. In Minneapolis, the local city council there, where they are removing the local police department from certain parts of their city. And I think, you know, this is all because people have had enough. People have been pushed too far to the limit. They are just tired. And so what you're seeing now are people that are tired. And when you push people so far to the limit, people are going to react. And so we are at this moment in history for a real time and a season and a reason. And the reason is because we have seen too many of our brothers and sisters who have been victims of police surveillance for far too long. And whether we have litigated these cases, whether we have settled cases in court, the Handshoe Agreement, the Raza case, and so many others that have come before us where we've had to go to court just to make sure that our rights were respected. And we believed years ago that the best way to do something different in New York City was to create legislation. And that's where the POST Act came from, an idea from the advocates, from all of you that work with your clients and see so many of our brothers and sisters, African American, Latino, our Muslim brothers and sisters who have been victims of surveillance for quite some time. And all we're asking, we've always said this from the very beginning, that this POST Act was a step forward. This is the floor and not the ceiling. This is an effort to establish a basic reporting system where we as New Yorkers understand how our taxpayer dollars are used for the purposes of police surveillance and technology across our city. Efforts like ShotSpotter, the license plate readers, Stingray operations, cell phone towers, there are many tools that the NYPD has at its disposal. A number of federal grants that they access, the Police Foundation and other outlets of resources that they're able to access, where they're purchasing these large items of equipment and we simply don't know how they're being used. And so many of you understand that this Post Act is really just an effort to require the department to disclose and develop an impact and a use policy for every piece of surveillance technology that it purchases, as well as new purchases in the future. And these measures, we believe, are extremely important to protect the privacy and the civil liberties of every New Yorker in our efforts to balance law enforcement and national security concerns and urgent need for transparency and democratic accountability. The NYPD's powerful surveillance equipment is enormous. And it includes items that I talked about, the stingrays, the cell phone towers, tracking locations, communications of phones in certain targeted neighborhoods, X-ray vans, which are used for radiation to see through walls and inside cars. Most recently, the eruption of drones that we've seen across the city. And many have asked the question of all of you and myself and my colleagues, what happens to all this information that's gathered from innocent bystanders, large gatherings, protests, demonstrations that happen across the city? And the answer is all of these questions. While the answers should be simple, we just don't know the answers because we've never had anything codified in local law that would mandate the reporting from the NYPD. So New York City will now be a part of history because we will join other cities like San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, Seattle, Detroit, Cambridge, Nashville to fight to know about the surveillance tools that law enforcement uses. And across this nation, there's been a real crying call for more police accountability and transparency. And this legislation to me is really a foundation. It means it's the beginning, family, and not the end. For the NYPD to be honest with the public, with New Yorkers, a public input process where New Yorkers can comment during the comment period. And ultimately, the final language on the impact and use study would be subject to the approval of the police commissioner. So there is still control that the NYPD has, and some would argue that that's a problem in itself. We wanted to find a balance because we knew a lot of concerns, but we also realized that we had nothing on the books today. This work would not be possible without all of the commitment and dedication, and really I call it labor of love. You guys have poured your heart and your soul into this bill and you have never given up. The meetings, the press conferences, the social media, all of the work you have done has not gone unrecognized, and I thank you on behalf of my staff and my team and the New York City Council, the 35 plus, I think it's 36 now, sponsors that we have on this bill. There has been a groundswell of support because I think people have realized that the time is now. And if there is anything we do to ensure as a community and as a city that the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and everyone else that we have lost to police violence, that their deaths are not in vain, that we are not only learning something, but we are going to change the process, then the Post Act is certainly a part of that. So I thank you, Albert. I thank the Brennan Center for Justice. I thank the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, the STOP Project. I thank the Urban Justice Center, the New York Civil Liberties Union, American Civil Liberties Union, Legal Aid Society, our friends at Council on American Islamic Relations, as well as the National Lawyers Guild, National Action Network, Empire State Indivisible, and many, many more. Thank you for your work. Thank you for staying the course. And most of all, thank you for being consistent. It's really easy along the way when you have legislation that's not popular, it's really easy to give up. But you guys knew that there would always be a way where this bill would not only be passed, but we would really send a larger message. We fundamentally believe that fighting for people's individual and basic civil rights, as well as protecting the public, are not mutually exclusive. We can do both at the same time without compromising public safety. And that has always been our message, that has always been our principle, because we believe as New Yorkers that we have a right to know and understand the technology and surveillance that the NYPD is using in our communities to keep us safe. And I think that's a fair argument, and we've always remained consistent in that. So I thank you all. This is a really important moment in history. It's one that we will never forget. And certainly our children, we have to make sure they understand that we're doing this work for them so they can live in a society and in a world that doesn't judge them by their race, their ethnicity, their zip code, and certainly by their religion and their faith. And so I thank you all. Congratulations to you, to this moment in history, and I look forward to the passage of the Post Act tomorrow at the full City Council. So thank you so much, Angel. Thank you, Albert.
Well, thank you so much, City Council member, again, for your leadership, for the incredible work. And I would note that one really exciting part of this bill is we're gaining co-sponsors so quickly that we're now actually, as of today, up to 37 co-sponsors, plus the public advocate, out of 51 who are now supporting the bill. It's really amazing to see just how broad a movement this has become.
That's awesome. I'm going to do a dance.
Definitely. This is it's all amazing to see unfolding. Next, I'm going to ask Chad Marlowe from the American Civil Liberties Union to speak. And just as a way of introduction, Chad has been such a crucial part of this fight here in New York, but he's been fighting for police surveillance reform across the country. And he has been doing just incredible work to redefine what it means to have civilian control of police surveillance. And so I'd like to ask him to say a few words.
Thank you, Albert. Again, my name is Chad Marlowe. I'm a Senior Advocacy and Policy Counsel at the ACLU. I just wanted to say first what an unbelievable privilege it is in this conference to follow the comments of Councilmember Gibson. I've been on a lot of press conferences, and that was a moment. That was incredibly emotional and inspiring, and I feel truly privileged to just be in line behind the council member after those remarks. So a little less than 4 years ago, the ACLU, together with a diverse range of national and local partners, launched an effort called Community Control Over Police Surveillance, or CCOPS, with the goal of bringing significantly greater transparency and accountability to the use of surveillance technologies by the police and other government agencies where their use is permitted at all. We wanted to bring an end to the practice of police departments deciding unilaterally and in secret if and how such surveillance technologies were acquired, deployed, and operated. We were very concerned by the threat to privacy that these technologies posed, but we were even more concerned with how surveillance and surveillance technologies have always disproportionately targeted communities of color and other vulnerable populations. That was not acceptable, and it had to change. From day one, passing the Post Act in New York City was a top goal of the CCOPS campaign. Since the campaign's launch, 13 jurisdictions have adopted CCOPS laws. As a result, CCOPS has gone from being a theoretical policy goal to an operational gold standard. Tomorrow, when the New York City Council votes to adopt the Post Act, the nation's largest city with the nation's largest police force will become America's 14th CCOPS jurisdiction, and it will be a watershed moment for the effort. Cities that are on the brink of passing CCOPS laws, like Detroit and St. Louis, will take notice of New York's actions. Cities like Washington, D.C., Boston, and Minneapolis, with burgeoning CCOPS efforts underway, will take notice of New York's actions. That is how momentum for change builds and flourishes. One victory leads to another. It cannot be lost on us that the Post Act is being adopted at a time in American history in which millions of Americans of all backgrounds are screaming out for police reform. Despite this, passing important police reforms is not easy. It takes great bravery and resolve to challenge entrenched practices in the face of powerful opposition. So let me first thank the protesters in New York and elsewhere who have made their voices heard. Let me thank Vanessa Gibson, Brad Lander, and Corey Johnson, and the veto-proof majority of New York City Council members who heard those cries for change, and tomorrow will deliver an important step in the right direction in the form of the Post Act. It will need to be one of many steps to come, but every step in the right direction is important, especially now. The Post Act will be a game changer for the city of New York and will deliver the transparency and accountability around surveillance technologies that New Yorkers have been demanding for a long time. It will also provide a boost to non-New Yorkers who are crying out for CCOPS laws in their own cities and towns. So thank you, New York City, for being the national guiding light you have always been and hopefully always will be.
Well, thank you so much, Chad, for really for helping New York turn into that model. So next, I'll ask Yves Filius from the New York affiliate of the ACLU, the New York Civil Liberties Union, to say a few words. Yves.
Thank you, Chad, and thank you, Albert. Thank you, Councilmember Gibson. Hello, everyone. My name is Yves Filius, Government Relations Strategist for the New York Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU of New York. The NYPD has lost trust with New Yorkers, the people they've sworn to protect and serve. The NYPD has weaponized public safety to terrorize communities of color by using devices like drones, stingrays, and x-rays, just to name a few. We're living in a time of civil unrest. After months of a virus that has killed Black people in huge numbers, shut down schools, and left our communities, families, and businesses, people are angry, whether they're at home trying to stay safe from the COVID pandemic or out protesting. We're at a crossroads to see whether New York City will fight for equity and justice for men and women who look like me. When the bill passes tomorrow, it won't mend the generational wounds of distrust caused by the NYPD, but it can be a start. We demand transparency. We refuse to write a blank check and turn a blind eye to a city agency that has shown nothing through its history but a consistent timeline of corruption, secrecy, and the basic violations of our civil liberties, especially for Black and brown New Yorkers. The abuse of power will no longer be tolerated. With the national conversation on defunding law enforcement making daily headlines, this bill will begin to provide the needed transparency on how our tax dollars are being used by the NYPD. And finally, we will know what technology is being implemented to surveil our people. I thank you for your time and enthusiastically urge council members to pass the Post Act tomorrow. Black Lives Matter.
Thank you so much, Yves. And yes, I think that is a sentiment every single person on this panel as part of this coalition agrees with, that Black Lives Matter, and that is central to reforming surveillance abuse. Next, I'll ask another stalwart member of the coalition who's been fighting for years to help pass this crucial legislation, Erika Johnson of the National Lawyers Guild. Erika, if you could unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erika Johnson. Thank you, Albert Cahn, for putting this together and your relentless work in the passage of this bill, and Vanessa Gibson for being a stalwart in this community and leadership and getting this bill to the floor. But I want to say that this is a momentous occasion, but I won't. The bill should have been passed 3 years ago. Tragedy shouldn't have to befall our Black and people of color citizens for change to happen. Change that the citizens of New York deserve, citizens of New York City deserve. The NOG has been a proud member in this fight for over 3 years, and we're proud to finally get Post Act to a point where we're actually being able to get it passed. But we're sad that it took this long and that it had to happen this way. The passing of the Post Act is only the beginning to much needed police reform. It's one piece in a much larger plan to keep not only just African Americans safe, but all POC and LGBTQ as well. So let's not forget about Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. Those are integral members of the communities that we have here. Black trans lives matter, so does Black Lives Matter. We have to celebrate the intersectionality of our Blackness and within our people of color community. Passing the Post Act is a step in bettering the human rights, not just for African Americans and people of color, but for all citizens in New York City. Thank you so much for Councilmember Gibson for your continued leadership, Albert Cahn for your relentless efforts, and all the members of this coalition for never giving up. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate the time for allowing me to address everyone.
Thank you so much for that, Erika. And I do want to just break in with some breaking news. According to Gloria Pazmino from New York One, the Mayor de Blasio has officially said that he is comfortable signing the Post Act into law when the measure passes. Obviously this needs to be confirmed. This is just one tweet, but I think this just speaks to the immense momentum that has been built by everyone on this call, and the dozens of other amazing community leaders and organizations from across the country who have come together to support this legislation. Not often that you get to see these things unfold in real time, and so very exciting to have everyone together for that. Next, I'll ask one of the superstars who's been also relentless in pushing for the Post Act and for so many other forms of surveillance reform, Jerome Greco of the Legal Aid Society. Jerome, could you unmute yourself?
Yes. Thank you, Albert. It's a little hard to go right after that announcement. I remember when we first started pushing this bill and we were really fighting for it, and the mayor publicly said that he wouldn't support it, he couldn't support it. To see that all the work of so many people start to pay off is wonderful, especially for something so important. The Legal Aid Society is the largest public defender office in the city, and we represent people across all 5 boroughs. Time and time again, my colleagues and I have seen the hide-and-seek game the NYPD plays with its paperwork. This is never more true than it relates to surveillance technology. Our ability to represent our clients, overwhelmingly people of color, is hindered by the clandestine use of surveillance against them, their families, and their communities. We cannot wage a zealous fight in court on their behalf if we do not even know there is something to fight over. For example, the NYPD used a cell site simulator, sometimes called a Stingray device, over 1,000 times without ever getting a warrant, without ever informing the defense. Most of the world, including public defenders, did not know such technology even existed. Once it was revealed and we were able to fight it, a judge ruled in our favor and found that such an invasive tool required a warrant. To this day, though, we're still unable to identify those previous cases in which a cell site simulator was used, and our clients in those cases were deprived of their rights to challenge its use. We can't let that happen again. We see facial recognition, but often not in the way one would expect. Its use is buried in shorthand code, deep in paperwork, or it's not mentioned at all. We have to use missing information to try to identify when and how it was used. We have had battles with prosecutors in the courts because even they are not always being informed that facial recognition has been used in a case. This is not a mistake, this is intentional. And this is just something that we are aware of its existence and that they're even hiding on an individual case, not to mention the things that we don't even know that they have or that are possible. Right now, the people are taking to the streets to express their dissatisfaction with the police and the state. We've seen drones used, but who knows for sure of all the different surveillance tools the NYPD is using to infringe on these protesters' First Amendment rights. They have a right to know, their attorneys have a right to know, and the public has a right to know. The Post Act was important when it was first introduced, and now it is crucial. Transparency is a necessary minimum. It is a significant step in the larger fight for police accountability and to protect the communities of color, the Muslim community, and the LGBTQ community. Thank you, Councilmember Gibson, for not allowing this bill to die. And thank you to all of the advocates who appeared today and those who couldn't make it, and the public for fighting for this bill and not giving up. And thank you to the city council members that have supported the bill. I just ask you take that final step, pass the Post Act. It's essential.
Well, thank you, Jerome. Thank you for your incredible work as part of this campaign. Next, I want to invite, one of the most stalwart advocates of civil rights in New York City, as someone who's been fighting side by side with us on the Post Act for many, many, many months now. And that's Derek Perkinson of the National Action Network. Derek, if you could please unmute yourself.
I have. Good morning, everyone. Glorious day today. Again, we all know, I want to thank everyone. I had a big thing written up, but you guys were so eloquent. I don't have to rehash a lot of things that were already said. There's more work to be done. This is just the first step on a lot of things. As technology gets more and more advanced and technology is growing at a rapid speed, we have to have safeguards in place to curtail it to some level, some degree. And I am honored and humbled, Albert, to stand with you guys, the whole coalition, Yves, Chad, Jerome, the whole team. You guys are phenomenal. Vanessa, I can't thank you enough, Councilwoman, for not letting it die, for standing strong. We've been fighting this thing for some time. So on behalf of the National Action Network, Reverend Dr. Al Sharpton, we were excited and happy to be a part of this fight for equality. And we will continue to fight for equality all around, and especially with new emerging technology growing by leaps and bounds. We have to stay at the forefront, and I salute the whole team here. Thank you for having me on the team, guys.
And thank you so much for the incredible work you've done as part of the team. Just for everyone from the press, we're going to have one final speaker now, but we're going to have a Q&A session after that. I would just ask you to submit your questions using the Q&A window that should be available at the bottom of your screen. And last but not least, we're joined by Ricky Silver, who is with another amazing partner organization who's been promoting this work all along, the Empire State Indivisible. So Ricky, if you could make sure you're unmuted.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm a co-lead organizer of Empire State Indivisible, and as a grassroots organization focused on increasing public engagement with democracy and enabling the passage of progressive policies to address systemic inequality across our state. We're beyond grateful and humbled by the leaders on this call and the many others who have been fighting for the passage of the Stop Act for a very long time. The Post Act. We know firsthand that secrecy and opacity are two indicators that power is being taken advantage of, whether it be in our democracy or in our institutions. And the simplest way to skirt accountability is to stay hidden. So make no mistake, the reluctance to pass the Post Act in the past is a clear indication to us and to many that our elected officials in the City Council have not prioritized this much needed accountability. We're humbled to have played a small role in building the public pressure needed to finally bring this much needed oversight to our city. But we want to be clear that the real credit lies in the leaders who have fought for these reforms well before they were popular, and for the millions of New Yorkers who have flooded the streets over the last few weeks fighting for Black lives. As technology increases and improves, the public will need to be engaged with our officials to find the right balance of public safety and privacy. And our group is committed to staying in this fight. Transparency drives accountability, and this level of transparency in the NYPD surveillance capabilities is well overdue. We know all too well never to celebrate a win in New York politics until it's truly done. So we look forward to tomorrow's vote and stand with our partners in calling on the City Council to vote yes, to take this critical first step for accountability. Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much, Ricky, for your support, for Empire State Indivisible support. I've received one question via email, and again, just gonna request that people submit your questions through chat or the Q&A function, but I know that sometimes these things don't work quite as smoothly as they should on Zoom. So please also feel free to email those questions to me directly if you have trouble using Zoom at Albert, ALBERT, @stopspying.org. So for the first question from Danielle Lay from WABC, Quote, the NYPD is arguing the Post Act will put undercover officers and informants at risk. Can you directly address this concern? And so I will start and then open it up to the broader group to discuss. And I think really the NYPD has been saying the sky is falling with the Post Act since the beginning. At first, they made outlandish claims that it was going to enable terrorism. But then we saw similar legislation passed in other jurisdictions, and they quickly lost that argument. We've seen them change their tactic over and over again, and they keep saying these horrible claims about what transparency will do, but we've seen transparency work at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, and there's nothing about the NYPD that makes it so special that it shouldn't be subject to civilian oversight and accountability. I believe these are ludicrous claims. They've never once explained how these alarmist scenarios would actually play out in reality. And so I don't think that these are serious objections. This is just the last cry of objection from an organization that is used to not actually being subject to anyone else's oversight. So happy to open it up to anyone else who would like to comment. Chad.
Yeah, so I agree with what Albert said, but I want to, again, broaden it out and then bring it back to New York. And again, as Albert pointed out, there are 13 other jurisdictions who have passed CCOPS laws, none of which have put any officers at risk or in any way compromised public safety. But I think it's important to contemplate the philosophy behind the comment, right? The NYPD is so determined to protect itself from perceived threats like transparency and accountability. And it's precisely when police departments view public engagement and transparency and accountability as threats to its mission that puts us in the situation we are right now nationally. And so I want to speak directly to the NYPD on this. There will be other police reform bills brought after the Post Act. I would encourage you to analyze them through a different lens, through the lens of cooperative public safety and how a bill can best serve and protect the people you are supposed to be serving and protecting. And stop using hyperbole and unsupported claims to defeat any attempt by the public and elected officials to exercise basic good government transparency and accountability measures over you. If you are not willing to make that small philosophical step, you are not going to advance beyond the kind of dire straits that police and community relations are in right now. And so let us hope that this kind of response to the Post Act is the last time that the NYPD throws out unsubstantiated scare tactics in order to defeat legislation that benefits the public.
Okay, would anyone else like to respond to that NYPD assertion? Jerome, quickly from you as well.
So I agree with everything that's already been said. And I think an important part of this is that the NYPD continuously fights any attempts to hold them accountable, to hold them transparent. We've seen that with Civil Rights Law 50-A. We've seen that in pretty much every attempt. We see them when they come to city council meetings, specifically on topics, and mysteriously don't have the facts and mysteriously don't have any statistics and don't have the answers to all the questions that they've known for a month were going to be asked at these hearings. And they have no credibility when they make these broad claims in order to prevent their accountability and transparency. And I think that this is just another part of that.
Completely agree. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions in the chat function, in the Q&A function. I haven't received any others via email. So I think we'll end things there. But of course, a press release will be going out later. Everyone on the panel will be available for follow-up questions individually. And thank you all for attending and for covering this really crucial story. And to my fellow panelists, thank you for all the amazing work you all have done. It's been such a pleasure, teaming up with all of you to make this bill a reality, and look forward to celebrating with you after the vote on Thursday. All right, stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.